In the heart of Africa, where the wilds of the Masai Mara stretch out in endless beauty, a story unfolded that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the animal kingdom. This isn't just a tale about survival, but a tale about compassion, trust, and an unexpected bond between a man and a pride of lions. It all started when David Thompson, a seasoned wildlife photographer, found himself in a life-or-death situation that defied every rule he'd ever learned. He was out on the banks of the Mara River, capturing the breathtaking beauty of nature, when his world was suddenly thrown into chaos. A tiny lion cub, no more than a few months old, had fallen into the raging floodwaters. The current was fierce, and the cub was being dragged helplessly downstream. David, who had spent 8 years documenting wildlife in the Masai Mara, had always followed one unbreakable rule: never interfere with nature. But in that moment, everything changed. When he saw the tiny cub struggling, its terrified cries pierced through the sounds of the river, and David could no longer stay detached. Without hesitation, he dropped his camera, made a split-second decision, and dove into the treacherous waters. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. David's rescue attempt would lead to a shocking encounter with the pride itself, a moment that would change his life forever. The bond that formed between him and the lions would defy every expectation of predator and prey. This is the unbelievable story of how a man saved a lion cub, and what happened when he found himself surrounded by the pride. The Masai Mara is one of the most famous wildlife reserves in Africa, home to some of the most magnificent creatures on the planet. The land is vast, wild, and unpredictable, with dramatic landscapes where the golden savannas stretch endlessly into the horizon, interrupted only by the occasional acacia tree. The Mara River cuts through this vast expanse, winding its way through the terrain, providing both a lifeline and a challenge for the wildlife that call this place home. David Thompson had spent 8 years in this wild paradise, capturing the raw beauty of Africa's wildlife. As a wildlife photographer, he had learned to observe and document the world around him without ever interfering. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience, precision, and respect for the creatures he aimed to capture. David had witnessed the incredible struggle for survival in the wild, but never before had he been faced with a decision that would shatter the unspoken rule of non-intervention. That on that fateful morning, as he prepared his camera and equipment. On the riverbank, the rain had been falling for hours. The river was swollen, moving fast and treacherous with hidden debris. The once calm water had turned into a powerful torrent, carrying anything in its path downstream. David had set up his camera, focusing on the beauty of the river and its surrounding landscape, when something caught his eye, something that would change everything. A lion cub, no more than 4 months old, had lost its footing near the riverbank. With a heart-wrenching cry, it tumbled into the rushing water, helplessly swept away by the current. David froze for a moment, unable to believe his eyes. He had watched animals interact with nature for years, but nothing had prepared him for this. Without a second thought, David knew he had to act. David was no stranger to danger. As a wildlife photographer, he had faced countless life-threatening situations, close encounters with lions, elephants, and even crocodiles. But nothing had prepared him for the moment he found himself wading into the Mara River, fighting against the relentless current with a tiny lion cub clinging to his shoulders. The decision was instantaneous. The cub was in distress, and every instinct within David screamed that he had to save it. His professional training told him to stay back, to let nature take its course, but his humanity overpowered that training in a split second. David dropped his camera and plunged into the river, ignoring the risks that came with the swollen waters. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to move forward, the cold water rushing around him. The current was unforgiving, pulling him toward the deeper, more dangerous sections of the river. The water was filled with debris, branches, logs, and rocks, any of which could easily knock him unconscious or worse. But David didn't care. All that mattered was the small lion cub in his arms, its tiny paws gripping his neck as it clung to him for dear life. David fought against the water, every stroke taking him closer to the riverbank. The cub was weak from swallowing water, its body trembling with fear and exhaustion. But it refused to let go. Somehow, in that moment, it held on with surprising strength. David could feel the little heart racing against his chest, each beat reminding him of the fragility of life and the preciousness of this moment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, David reached the shallower water near the bank, gasping for air as he pulled the cub out of the current. But as he looked up, his breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what was waiting for him on the other side. As David struggled through the river with the exhausted cub, he had no idea that he was being watched. From the riverbank, hidden among the acacia trees, 5 adult lionesses had been tracking the sound of their cubs' distress calls. The pride had been searching for the cub, following his scent trail to the river's edge. And now, they were witnesses to the most unbelievable moment of David's life. When David finally made it to the shallows, his body trembling from the cold and exhaustion, he looked up and froze. The entire pride of lions was there, 5 lionesses, and a massive male lion with a dark, commanding mane. They stood motionless in a semicircle, their amber eyes fixed on him and the cub he was holding. David's heart raced as the realization hit him. He was surrounded. The pride's presence was overwhelming. He was in chest-deep water, with 6 full-grown lions blocking his path to safety. Every ounce of training he had in the wild told him that this was a dangerous situation. Lions are fiercely protective of their young, and David, a human stranger, was holding one of their cubs. Any sudden movement, any mistake, could trigger an attack. And David knew, in that instant, that his life could end in a matter of seconds. The tension in the air was thick, and David's mind raced through the options. He was trapped. There was no way out, and the pride wasn't making any move. They simply stood there, watching him, their eyes never leaving the cub in his arms. But then, the matriarch, the largest lioness, took a step closer. David held his breath, bracing for what he thought was inevitable. The lions were about to attack, but what happened next shocked David to his core. The matriarch, instead of charging at him, lowered her head. It wasn't an aggressive move, but something entirely unexpected. She bowed. The other members of the pride remained still, watching in silence. David stood frozen, not knowing whether this was a sign of aggression or something completely different. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The lioness lifted her head and made direct eye contact with David. It wasn't the cold, calculating stare of a predator assessing prey. It was something else. Recognition. Gratitude. David had no words to describe the depth of the gaze. It was as if the lioness understood what he had done for her cub, and instead of seeing him as a threat, she saw him as an ally, a friend. The cub in David's arms began to mew softly, calling to its pride. The sound seemed to break the tension in the air. The matriarch stepped closer, but David didn't move. There was no fear in her movements, only a quiet confidence. And then, to David's astonishment, she gently extended her head toward him. Her rough tongue made contact with his forehead, the same way she would groom her own cubs. This was something no one had ever seen before. A wild lioness, a predator at the top of the food chain, was showing David the same nurturing behavior. She would show her own pride members. It was as if she was accepting him, if only for a brief moment. As part of her family, the other lions began to relax. The male lion, who had remained distant, now moved closer, sitting down on the riverbank. The lionesses, who had been tense and defensive just moments before, now stood calmly, watching the interaction. David, still in shock, slowly realized that he was not in danger. The pride wasn't here to harm him. They were here to express something incredible: gratitude. What David experienced that day challenged everything he knew about wildlife. In a world where animals are often seen as driven purely by instinct, he had witnessed something deeply human in a lioness's behavior: recognition, compassion, and the understanding of moral debt. David slowly made his way back to his equipment. The pride parted to make a path for him. They escorted him, not as a threat, but as an honored guest. The matriarch's final gesture, a soft press of her forehead against his, was a thank you that transcended species boundaries. David continued his work as a wildlife photographer, but nothing would ever compare to the life-changing moment he shared with that pride of lions. And to this day, he believes that animals, like humans, are capable of far more than we give them credit for. They feel gratitude, honor, and love, qualities that make them more similar to us than we realize. This extraordinary encounter wasn't just about saving a lion cub. It was a profound reminder that compassion and understanding are universal languages, spoken not just by humans, but by all creatures, great and small.